So today we have a theme that's going on this week, and what we're talking about is fact over feelings. Again, fact over feelings, because the reality is that some of us are driven by feelings versus facts. And it's so important that as leaders that we are driven by facts and making sure that we are doing the right things to make sure that when we are addressing conflict, when we are addressing a lot of the issues that we feel, there is fact-based. Of course, there's a feeling aspect, there's an emotional intelligence piece of it, but we also need the facts in order for us to confirm and for us to ensure that we have the right data and information when we are addressing something, but also remembering that human element, that aspect of emotional intelligence as well. So what are we going to talk about today? Today we're talking about expectations. Again, fact over feelings. And again, I want us to remember that as leaders that we need to also have a certain level of emotional intelligence, because when we are interacting with people, we want to make sure we tap into the human side of things. That's the new series I'm going to start talking about, is humanizing the workplace. But essentially, we still need facts. We need to make sure that we're also considering that when we are creating expectations, because the reality is expectations on the wrong side, when it becomes unrealistic, it can really have a negative effect of our interactions within the workplace. So let's first talk about what expectations are, right? So expectations are a strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. So it's really future based. It says an expectation, which is the belief that is centered on the future, may or may not be realistic. So again, we can look at expectations as something realistic or unrealistic. And what we want to make sure we're preventing is getting on that unrealistic side, especially as leaders, especially as we're managing our teams, especially with us, because sometimes our expectations for ourselves might fall into that unrealistic category, which again could affect your output. It could affect how you see yourself or how you see others. So I came up with a little, a little problem here, right? Or this little factor of what happens when an unrealistic expectation falls short. So if you add those together, what could happen is now you're coming up with false conclusions, negative feelings, and behaviors. And what essentially it can do, it can chip away our relationships, those professional relationships that we're trying to build with our team members. It can shut down our goals. It can affect our faith, or even steer our lives to a space of unhealthiness. So we have to make sure that we are staying again on the realistic side of expectations for us as leaders, but also as for our teams, because on both sides of it, it could again affect our output and how we show up in our organizations, how we show up to support our teams. So let's look at both sides of it. And what we're trying to deter from happening is falling on the unrealistic side of expectations. So let's look at some examples. Some examples might be, my team members should be able to, right? So there are some things that, yes, expectations are clear. Maybe when someone comes into an organization, there are already values, there's a mission, there's certain expectations that you have in regards to their roles and responsibilities. But when we start getting into the weeds of things, sometimes we have these ideas or these assumptions that are created that, okay, they should be able to do these things. But just like I put out a YouTube video and it was called Leader Show their team members how to swim. Have you provided them with the tools? Do they have everything that they need for them to be able to execute on that, instead of just the assumption that they should be able to? So that's one of the examples. If I do this, my supervisor will promote me. Maybe we're thinking that if we do X, Y, and Z, check all these boxes, that we're going to get promoted, we're going to get that executive role. And yes, essentially, we hope that our organizations will promote within. We hope that this will result to this, but essentially, is that truly realistic when we are coming up with those expectations for ourselves? Or maybe it can wait. It can wait another day. It can wait another week, and it can wait another month. And that might be a project. Maybe that's a conversation that you need to have with your team members, and you're adding more time on it. But can it really wait? You're putting an expectation of, you know what, if I wait a year or wait a month, or I'll talk to them next week. But then you never know how that might still bubble into additional issues. So it might be, you not addressing something, or you focusing on a project when you need to. So again, it might be time-based. They should have this skill down by the time we meet again. So again, are you teaching that team member how to swim? Are you assuming that because you had a conversation with them on this month, that they're going to have it together by by this month. They might, again, need more support. They will be able to resolve it on their own. And essentially, what happens when it doesn't happen? Has it been feeling, assumption, or fact-based? Because a lot of times, again, we're not looking at the fact side of it. We might give someone a good time frame, or we might have these conversations with ourselves, but essentially we want to make sure that we're looking at the facts. Do we have a standardized process to make sure that we go from point A to point Z? Or is it, you're at point A, but you're not even getting the tools necessary for you to get to the other side of it, and it's just an expectation. You think that if you do this, or if you think that if they do that, this is going to be the out product. But essentially, we need to make sure that we're doing a fact-based side of things as well, to make sure that we have the proper tools or resources to get to the other side of that expectation. So let's talk about that. What is it that you exactly need to do in order for you to have a fact-based side of expectation? One of the first things you want to consider, especially if it's tied to a person, was there a discussion with that person? Was there ever a plan created? So when you are creating expectations, or you have expectations and you don't involve the other person, that's a problem. I've had the team members where I assume, or I just know that they know, but they don't know because I never had that conversation. Or say in the beginning of when someone starts within your section or within your organization, you never even talk to them about the expectations of the role. So they're just functioning day to day, not knowing that they need to, have this type of output. They need to provide this every week. You make this assumption, but you do not know. So essentially, make sure that you're having the conversations if it's something connected with someone else, and making sure that you create a plan with them. It's a collaboration, so you guys can actually get to the other side, and now the expectation becomes more realistic. The next thing is it solution-based, or has it created more problems? We want to make sure that when we are looking at expectations, it should be solution-based. There should be some positives on the other side. But what if it starts to create problems? And again, those professional relationships, if now these assumptions or these beliefs start to affect how you're looking at that team member or even yourself, now it's creating more problems. So we want to make sure that when we are creating expectations, they're solution-based versus them being something that causes more additional problems. The next thing is test it with the double standard technique. Remember, there's a saying that do as I say, not as I do, but we need to do as we say as well. So if you give someone a task, I want you to ask yourself this expectation: would you do it as well? Or how would you feel if the shoe was on the other foot? We need to make sure that when we are coming up, or we have expectations for other people, we will do it as well. So you need to test out your expectations on yourself and ask yourself, you know what? If someone told me I had to get this done by this time, would that really be effective? How would I feel about that? And even if you said, yes, I know I can knock it out, the next question is, does the person have the resources, and is there time available to reach that goal? Because a lot of times we assume someone will get to the other side of a task or the other side of something, but they don't have the proper resources. They might not even have the time because you've inundated them with so much things that they have to do that they can't get to the other side of that goal. So you want to ask yourself, you might have the resources, you might have the time, but does that other person have the resources and the time? Is there room to adapt? We need to make sure that there's adaptability when it comes to expectations, because again, like I mentioned earlier, when we create expectations and we don't have that room for adaptability, because again, sometimes things fall short, sometimes things need to be adjusted, but what happens? You get those false conclusions, negative feelings, and behaviors, and that's what we want to prevent. We want to try to stay on the right side of realistic expectations. So really start making sure that there's room to adapt and adjust. Hey, okay, if this didn't happen, this is what we need to do to really focus on the goal in a different way. And lastly, was it created using the SMART goal process? Those are things that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. If you start to focus on expectation and start using the SMART goal process, that's really going to benefit you. So if you've never heard of the SMART goal process, it's pretty much a standard in goal setting. Utilize that when you're creating expectations, when you have expectations for other people. Have you considered the specificity of it? What do you want to do specifically? Is it measurable? How will you know that you've reached it? Okay. How would you know you've reached the goal? The next part, is it achievable? Is it in your power to accomplish? Again, look at the resources, the time. When I went back to school and I started to go back into my studies, I recognized that I had to do school differently because I couldn't do it solely face to face. I'm a single mom, so I had to go about going to school a little differently to make it more achievable. Because if I decided I was going to just take straight face to face classes, then I might run into problems with childcare, or I might run into problems with the time frame of when I have to pick up my children and when I have to go to class. So I had to make sure that I put things in place so I can go back to school and I can show up. So is it achievable? Do you have that power to accomplish it? So making sure you check those resources, your time, all those different variables within your life or within your workplace to identify if that's achievable. The next thing, is it realistic? Can you realistically achieve it? If I said I want to get a master's degree in a year, is that possible? What would that look like? What would it take? For me, that might not work. So it might not be realistic for me, but maybe it's realistic for you. So really start looking at those aspects. And then, is it timely, right? When exactly do you want to accomplish it by? So all those aspects are going to be so important when you're creating expectation versus the assumptions that we have. We assume that individuals should do these. We assume that it should be that. But we need to make sure that we are taking the right steps so we can make sure that our processes and expectations are based off of facts. And again, leaders, we have to make sure that there is a level of emotional intelligence, how you approach things, how you communicate, how you connect with people, how you regulate yourself. But essentially, when we're making decisions and really wanting yourself or even someone else to get to the other side of something, we have to make sure that we are checking all these boxes to make sure we can achieve it. So I want us to leave with manage expectations with facts. With facts, go through that process that I showed you. Facts allow you the opportunity to act versus react. Why? Because what happens is when you have false expectations or unrealistic, you'll react or you'll respond in a way where you're just, again, jumping to conclusions. You're emotional about it. It becomes more feeling based. But when you are going through the process and you start to really break down the weeds and what it takes to get to the other side of a goal or to reach it, then you'll start realizing like, okay, I don't need to be emotional about it. Essentially, you didn't have the resources. You didn't have the time. We need to adapt, and then we can get to the other side of it, because we want to make sure we're effective as leaders in the household and also in the workplace by really going about how we manage expectations a lot differently when we're considering the facts. So really make sure that you're doing it and you're considering all those things before you respond to someone that might not be reaching a goal like you expected them to. So you guys have an amazing day, an amazing holiday weekend, and I will catch you guys next week.